professionals of Reddit. What's the most overused inside joke or act you see at nearly every wedding that people think is unique? Story 1. I work as a wedding DJ, and let me tell you, the shoe game is not as original as people think. It's that thing where the couple sits back to back, each holding one of their own shoes and one of their partners, and they answer questions by raising the appropriate shoe. Every single wedding. And guess what? The questions are always the same. Who said I love you first? Who spends more money? Who's the better driver? Who's more likely to get lost? The crowd always acts like it's the funniest thing they've ever seen, even though I've literally heard the same jokes delivered by different people 100 times. The bride always hesitates when answering, who is messier? Because she doesn't want to start a fight. The groom always gets called out for taking longer in the bathroom. It's like a universal script at this point. Story 2. As a wedding photographer, I've seen this same hilarious moment at so many weddings. During the cake cutting, the couple playfully smears cake on each other's faces. The bride usually looks horrified, the groom laughs, and then either one of two things happen. She laughs along, or she's absolutely furious, but has to keep smiling for the guests. The worst case I ever saw, the groom full-on smashed cake into his new wife's face, getting it all in her professionally done hair and makeup. She had spent hours getting ready, and she was visibly upset. But what made it worse? His mom thought it was funny and started egging him on. "That's my boy," she shouted, laughing hysterically while the bride stormed off to the bathroom. That marriage didn't last 2 years. Story 3. I'm a wedding planner, and I have a love-hate relationship with the surprise dance routine the groom and his groomsmen always think is a groundbreaking idea. You know the one, where they act all serious for the first dance, and then boom, the music changes, and suddenly they're all doing a poorly rehearsed mix of the Macarena, the Carlton, and whatever TikTok trend is hot that week. It's like watching the same movie over and over, just with different acts. Story 4. I bartend weddings, and I can promise you that every couple thinks their signature cocktail is something unique. Spoiler alert, it's not. Every single wedding has a his and hers drink, and it's always some variation of these. A fruity vodka-based drink for the bride, usually named something cutesy like Blushing Bride or Mrs. Margarita. A whiskey-based drink for the groom, often with a pun like Old-Fashioned Love or The Groom's Choice. The guests drink beer and wine anyway. I once had a couple get mad that their special cocktails weren't selling. But when the bride's drink is a mix of 5 different sugary liqueurs and the groom's is straight bourbon with a dash of bitters, what did they expect? If you want to be different, just have an open bar. Trust me. Story 5. I'm a wedding officiant, and I can't tell you how many couples think they're being original when they include some quirky, unexpected vow in their ceremony. The biggest offenders? Pop culture references. I've heard so many variations of, I promise to love you even when you steal the covers and when your team loses the Super Bowl. I vow to stand by your side, even when you make me binge watch The Office for the 5th time. I love you 3000. The couple cracks up like it's the funniest thing ever, and the guests all politely chuckle. Meanwhile, I'm standing there thinking, this is the 3rd time I've heard that exact joke this month. By all means, have fun with your vows. Just don't think quoting a Marvel movie is groundbreaking. Story 6. I'm a wedding videographer. And let me tell you about the most predictable, spontaneous moment I see at weddings. The groomsmen fake objecting to the wedding. It always plays out the same way. The officiant asks if anyone has any objections, and one of the groomsmen, always the loudest, always the most attention-hungry, clears his throat dramatically. The room goes silent. The bride stiffens. The groom rolls his eyes. Then the guy says something like, "Bro, I just thought we had something special." Or, "Wait, I thought I was your best man for a reason." Cue nervous laughter from the crowd, the bride awkwardly chuckling, and the officiant sighing because they've seen this 100 times before. Once, a groomsman pulled this stunt without warning, and the bride's dad actually got up, fists clenched, ready to throw hands. The guy had to quickly explain it was a joke before we had a full-on brawl in the middle of the ceremony. Story 7. I'm a florist, and I can't tell you how many times I've seen brides insist on having a bouquet toss fake out. Here's how it goes. The bride gathers all the single ladies, raises her arms as if she's about to throw, then stops at the last second, turns around, and hands the bouquet directly to one of her friends, usually a bridesmaid whose boyfriend is standing nearby. Everyone gasps, the boyfriend looks nervous, the friend laughs, sometimes uncomfortably, and the DJ plays something dramatic like Single Lady. The guy always has to awkwardly play along while people cheer, and you can tell in his eyes he's calculating how soon he can escape this conversation. One time I saw a guy straight up leave the room right after it happened. The couple broke up a month later. If you're thinking of doing this at your wedding, maybe check if your friend actually wants to be publicly pressured into an engagement. Story 8. As a wedding coordinator, one thing I see at nearly every wedding is the funny ring bearer prank. Parents think it's hilarious to put a toddler in a tiny tux, hand him a pillow, and pretend he's carrying the real rings, only for him to either start crying and refuse to walk, sprint full speed in the opposite direction, throw the pillow at someone. The guests all laugh like it's the cutest thing ever, and the couple acts surprised, but let's be real. We all knew the kid wasn't going to walk down the aisle perfect. The worst one I ever saw? The couple thought it would be cute to have their dog as the ring bearer. Midway down the aisle, the pup stopped, sniffed around, then peed on the bride's dress. I had to physically hold her back from screaming in front of 150 people. She still smiled for photos, though. Story 9. I'm a wedding photographer, and if I had $1 for every time a couple asked for a funny wedding party pose, I'd be retired. The two biggest offenders: the attack photo, where the bridesmaids pretend to pull the bride away from the groom, while the groomsmen hold him back. The running from the T-Rex shot, where everyone acts like they're sprinting away in terror, so the photographer can Photoshop in a giant dinosaur later. Newsflash, neither of these are original any. One time, a groom wanted the guys to pretend they were playing a game of poker, while the bride stood behind him looking angry. He thought it was hilarious. The bride, not so much. Another time, a couple asked me to make it look like a UFO was beaming them up in the final wedding shot. Sure, it was different, but spending 2 hours in Photoshop for a joke that only they found funny? Yeah, no thanks. Story 10. As a caterer, I see couples trying so hard to have a unique food moment at their wedding, but a few things keep happening over and over again. First, the late-night surprise fast food delivery. At some point in the night, after everyone's been drinking and dancing, the couple dramatically announces that, OMG, they ordered McDonald's or Taco Bell. People act like it's the most unexpected, wild thing ever. Meanwhile, every other wedding I've worked has done the exact same thing. Then there's the edgy wedding cake. Some couples want to be different, so they replace their wedding cake with donuts, cupcakes, or a tower of cheese wheels. The problem? Nobody eats it. People expect cake. They might like the idea of cheese, but after a night of champagne and dancing, they want something sweet. I've seen entire tables of untouched alternative desserts go straight into the trash. And finally, this one is my favorite. When couples think it'll be hilarious to have mini shots passed out right before the vows. Look, I love a fun wedding, but when grandpa is taking a tequila shot next to a flower girl, maybe rethink the timing. Story 11. I'm a wedding DJ, and I have one word for you: the cha-cha slide. Every single wedding, without fail, someone thinks it's absolutely necessary to put on cha-cha slide, Cupid shuffle, or Macarena, like they're bringing out some secret weapon that will get everyone on the dance floor. Spoiler alert, they're not. At first, people groan. The older guests roll their eyes. The too cool for this crowd clings to their drinks. But then, like clockwork, that one drunk aunt loses her mind, screaming, "Oh my God! This is my song," and suddenly, the entire dance floor is packed. The best part? There's always one person who doesn't know the steps. They either try to follow along awkwardly or just stand there, confused and panicked, like they've been thrown into a flash mob they never signed up for. I once played a wedding where the groom requested Cotton Eye Joe 3 separate times. His new wife finally yelled, "If I hear this song one more time, I'm filing for divorce." Guess what? Someone requested it again at the after-party. Story 12. I'm a wedding planner, and I've seen a disturbing trend lately. Groomsmen getting way too into the garter room. You know the drill. The groom gets down on his knees, the bride sits in a chair, and he's supposed to tastefully remove the garter from her leg. Supposed to. Instead, what usually happens? He treats it like an America's Got Talent audition. He blindfolds himself, starts doing body rolls, or, in extreme cases, goes under the bride's dress headfirst like he's mining for gold. Meanwhile, Grandma is sitting front row, clutching her pearls in horror. One time, a groom pulled out a pair of scissors and jokingly cut the garter off. The bride did not think it was funny. Another guy decided to seductively remove it with his teeth, except he accidentally bit her thigh so hard that she yelled out in pain. The entire reception fell silent. The worst part? The groomsmen always act like this is the best joke in history, hyping him up like it's a frat party. Meanwhile, half the guests are sitting there wondering why they had to witness softcore improv at a wedding. Story 13. I work as a wedding photographer, and I need to talk about the sparkler send-off disaster. It's supposed to be this magical, picture-perfect moment where guests hold sparklers high while the couple runs through, all smiles. And when it works, beautiful, stunning, looks like a fairy tale. But when it doesn't work, it's a fire hazard with alcohol-fueled coordination issues. First, no one lights their sparklers at the same time. One side is ready while the other is still fumbling with lighters. And by the time they get it together, the first sparklers have already burned out. Then you have the drunk guest. I once saw a guy light a sparkler, immediately forget it was in his hand, then accidentally set a bridesmaid's hair on fire. She was fine, just a little sin. But that was the last time that venue allowed sparkle. Another time, the couple tripped while running through, and the groom face planted right into a pile of still-burning sparklers. His tux, singed, his ego, completely destroyed. But the absolute worst? The time a guest threw a sparkler like a firework. It landed directly in the bride's train. The whole thing caught fire and we had to put it out with champagne. They still got a great photo though. Story 14. I bartend weddings. And if there's one thing that never fails to happen, it's the one drunk guest who thinks they're the life of the party. It's usually an uncle, a cousin, or a groomsman who started drinking way too early and is now on a mission to steal the spotlight. At one wedding, this guy kept demanding we make him something that will make me blackout but also taste good. Red flag, right? An hour later, he was up on stage with the band, slurring the lyrics to "Livin' on a Prayer" while the bride and groom just stared in horror. Another time, a drunk dad grabbed the mic during the best man speech and went on a 20-minute rant about how he never thought his daughter would get married. The bride sobbed, not from happiness. And then there was the guy who tried to challenge the father of the bride to a dance battle. Mid-spin, he tripped over his own feet, knocked over the entire wedding cake, and had to be carried out before the first dance even happened. Moral of the story? Cut off the guy in the loudest suit by 8 p.m. Story 15. I'm a wedding officiant. And let me tell you about the most awkward silent moment that happens at almost every wedding. The groom turns to the bride, takes a deep breath, and says, "I just want to take a moment to soak this all in." And then, dead silence. The guests shift uncomfortably. The bride forces a smile. The officiant, me, stares into the abyss, wondering if we're supposed to wait or just move on. Sometimes the groom starts tearing up, which is sweet. Other times he just stands there, like he's waiting for dramatic background music to start playing. The longest pause I ever witnessed? A full 45 seconds of absolute silence. The couple just stared at each other, and the bride finally whispered, "Should I say something?" He panicked, said, "I love you," and the guests awkwardly clapped like they were trying to break the tension. Romantic? Maybe. But please, if you're going to pause for dramatic effect, at least practice it first. Story 16. I'm a wedding coordinator, and I've lost count of how many times I've had to deal with the surprise wedding performance that should have stayed a private moment. It always starts the same way. The groom, best man, or, God help us, the father of the bride, secretly plans a song or dance routine to surprise the bride. Usually, it's something painfully rehearsed that they're convinced will be a tear-jerking moment. Except, it's not. One groom insisted on singing his vows, a cappella. He was tone-deaf, forgot the lyrics midway, and ended up mumbling, I love you, babe," while everyone just stared. The bride looked so embarrassed but had to force a smile while her mother covered her face in horror. Another time, a group of groomsmen thought it'd be hilarious to do a Magic Mike-style striptease during dinner. The bride's grandparents were front row. The mother of the groom was screaming. They actually got banned from the venue after. And then, there was the best man who rewrote the lyrics to Bohemian Rhapsody so the entire speech was sung. It went on for 5 minutes. The guests were in agony. If you're planning a surprise performance at your wedding, don't. Story 17. I'm a caterer, and one thing I see at way too many weddings is the over-the-top dessert table that no one eats. Couples go insane designing these lavish displays of cupcakes, macarons, cake pops, and hand-painted artisan chocolates. The table looks like something out of a Pinterest fever dream. Guests gasp at how beautiful it is. And then, they don't touch a thing. People fill up on dinner, drink too much, and completely ignore the desserts. By the end of the night, the table is still full except for maybe a few cookies someone's kid grabbed. I've seen entire 3-tier donut walls go to waste. The worst was a couple who ordered a chocolate fountain with fresh fruit and marshmallows. Sounds great, right? Except the kids got to it first. Within 10 minutes, there was melted chocolate everywhere. On the linens, the walls, one guy's suit jacket. The bride cried when she saw the mess. The chocolate fountain was quietly removed before the first dance. If you want to do something unique for dessert, just serve cake. Story 18. I'm a wedding videographer, and let me talk about overused epic wedding entrances. The couple always wants to do something crazy when they enter the reception. Except everyone is doing these now, so they aren't original. The bride and groom riding in on scooters or bikes? Seen it a dozen times. One groom wiped out before even reaching the dance floor. The bridal party dancing in with sunglasses and confetti? Every wedding ever. The couple rushing in with a fake WWE-style championship belt? Bro, it's been done. One time, a couple had their groomsmen carry them in on their shoulders. Except one of the groomsmen lost his balance and dropped the groom. The guy landed flat on his back. They had to pause the entire reception so he could recover. The worst? A couple tried to do the Running Man challenge into the room, except the bride tripped on her own dress and tore the hem. She had to spend the next 30 minutes getting it pinned back together while guests just sat there waiting. Sometimes, a simple entrance works best. Story 19. I'm a florist. And let's talk about terrible outdoor wedding decisions. Everyone loves the idea of a beautiful, romantic outdoor wedding with perfect lighting, a light breeze, and birds chirping in the background. You know what actually happens? Chaos. One wedding, the couple wanted an open field ceremony with zero cover. Right before the vows, a massive gust of wind sent flower petals, programs, and half the decorations flying. The bride's veil got ripped off her head and carried into a nearby tree. The groom had to climb up to get it while everyone awkwardly waited. Another couple insisted on having real candles in tall glass vases for their sunset ceremony. Halfway through, a guest accidentally kicked one over, and a small fire started right next to the aisle. We had to stomp it out before the couple even said, "I do." But my personal favorite, a couple who wanted a horse to bring the bride in. Sounds romantic, except the horse freaked out when the DJ tested the sound system. The bride had to jump off before it bolted across the field. Outdoor weddings? Plan for disaster. Story 20. I'm a wedding officiant, and let me tell you about the most awkward speeches I've ever heard. Some people think wedding speeches should be a stand-up comedy routine. They're wrong. One best man started his speech with, "Well, I honestly didn't think this day would come because groom was a total player, but here we are." The bride's parents? Horrified. The bride? Furious. The groom? Looking for the nearest exit. Another father of the bride told a 10-minute story about how his daughter used to wet the bed until she was 12. I swear I heard gasps from the crowd. But the worst? The maid of honor roasted the bride for 30 straight minutes. She called her bossy, bad at cooking, and lucky she found someone who puts up with her. It was so brutal that half the guests left the room out of secondhand embarrassment. Moral of the story? If your speech could potentially ruin friendships, don't say it. Story 21. I'm a wedding coordinator, and I have to talk about bridezilla meltdowns over the dumbest things. Look, I get it. Weddings are stressful, but some brides completely lose their minds over things that no one else would even notice. One bride screamed at me because the napkins were slightly off-white instead of pure snow white. She made us swap out all 200 napkins twice because she insisted they clashed with the tablecloths. The guests? They didn't even care. Another bride threw her bouquet at her maid of honor's head because her veil wasn't fluffed properly before she walked down the aisle. The poor maid of honor was just standing there, smiling, when bam, full-speed flower attack. The worst one? A bride refused to walk down the aisle because the ring bearer's shoelace was untied. She stood in the back of the venue, arms crossed, demanding that someone fix it immediately while the entire wedding party stood in silence. The kid's dad had to crawl on the floor to tie the shoe while everyone awkwardly waited. Moral of the story: if your biggest wedding problem is a slightly different shade of white, you're doing just fine. Story 22. I work as a DJ, and let me tell you about the terrible first dance song choices people make. Everyone wants their first dance to be meaningful, but some couples don't listen to the lyrics before choosing a song. I once had a couple request "Every Breath You Take" by The Police. You know, the song about a creepy stalker? They swayed romantically while their guests whispered to each other, "Do they even know what this song is about?" Then there was the couple who picked "I Will Always Love You" by Whitney Houston. Beautiful song, right? Except it's literally about a breakup. Watching them dance to a song about parting ways forever was one of the most awkward things I've ever witnessed. But the absolute worst? A groom thought it'd be hilarious to start their first dance with "My Heart Will Go On" from Titanic. He even pretended to drown at the end of the song while the groomsmen pulled the bride away dramatically. His new wife wasn't laughing. Story 23. I'm a photographer, and one thing that never fails to go wrong: the ring exchange. It seems simple. You take the ring, put it on your spouse's finger, and boom, married. But somehow, something always happens. One time, the best man completely forgot the rings in the groom's hotel room. We had to send someone sprinting across the venue to grab them, while the entire ceremony just paused. The officiant tried to joke, "Well, I guess this is a test of patience." No one laughed. Another time, the groom was so nervous that his hands were sweaty, and when the bride tried to put the ring on, it wouldn't go past his knuckle. She kept pushing. His finger turned bright red, and she finally had to spit on it just to slide it on. And the worst? A bride dropped the ring mid-exchange. It bounced off the altar, rolled down the aisle, and landed in a floor vent. We had to remove an entire grate to get it back. If you're getting married, double-check that the rings are in your best man's pocket. Story 24. I work as a bartender at weddings, and I have so many stories of groomsmen getting way too drunk before the ceremony even starts. It's always the same. The groom and his friends are way too hyped, and they think taking shots before the wedding will calm their nerves. Spoiler alert, it never does. One wedding, the groom took 5 shots of whiskey before walking down the aisle. By the time the vows started, he was swaying back and forth. At one point, he forgot his own name. The officiant had to repeat the vows twice because he kept slurring his words. Another time, a groomsman got so wasted that he fell asleep during the ceremony. Midway through, he snored so loudly that the bride stopped talking and just stared at him. The groom had to nudge him awake, and the guy stood up like nothing happened. But the worst? A best man got so drunk that he threw up directly behind the altar during the ceremony. The guests in the front row heard it, and the poor officiant had to pretend nothing happened while everyone else gagged. Weddings are long. Pace yourself. Story 25. I'm a florist, and let's talk about wedding decorations that cause absolute disasters. One couple insisted on having floating candles lining the entire aisle. It looked beautiful, until a guest tripped over one and knocked over half the candles. The bride had to walk down the aisle with puddles of wax everywhere. Another time, a bride wanted a huge floral arch over the altar. Right before the ceremony, a gust of wind knocked the whole thing over, sending flowers and metal rods crashing onto the officiant. He was fine, but the arch had to be completely dismantled last minute. But the most insane? A couple decided to release doves as they said, "I do." Sounds romantic, right? Except the doves refused to fly away. Instead, they just hopped around the altar, confusing everyone. One landed directly on the groom's head and just sat there. Another pooped on the maid of honor's dress. The photographer still managed to get some great shots, just not the ones the couple expected. Story 26. I'm a wedding planner, and let me tell you about the absolute chaos that happens when people decide to include kids in their wedding. Everyone thinks having flower girls and ring bearers is adorable, until the meltdowns start. One time, a 3-year-old flower girl refused to walk down the aisle unless she had a lollipop. We had to bribe her with M&Ms just to get her moving, and even then, she stopped halfway, dumped all her petals in one spot and yelled, "I'm done," before walking off. At another wedding, the ring bearer threw the pillow like a football the second he reached the altar. The actual wedding rings, they went flying. The officiant, the groom, and the best man had to crawl on the floor in front of 200 guests to find them. The worst was a kid who got bored during the ceremony and decided to entertain himself by running in circles around the couple during their vows. His mom just sat there laughing while the bride looked murderous. Weddings and toddlers? Not a good mix? Story 27. I'm a wedding DJ, and if I had $1 for every time someone crashed the mic to give an unplanned speech, I'd be rich. There's always one person, usually an uncle, an old friend of the family, or a drunk groomsman, who suddenly thinks they must share their thoughts with everyone. One time, an uncle grabbed the mic right after the best man's speech and went on a 15-minute rant about how no one in the family thought the groom would ever get married. He thought it was hilarious. The groom? Not so much. At another wedding, a bridesmaid interrupted the maid of honor's speech to add her own thoughts. She grabbed the mic, slurred out, "No, but seriously, bride is like my best friend. I mean, we've been through so much, and honestly, I think if things were different, it could have been me up there, you know." The crowd went silent. The bride just blinked at her. The groom looked horrified. But the worst? A mother-in-law hijacked the mic and started praying for the bride to become more obedient to her son. She went on for 10 whole minutes while the guests sat there in stunned horror. Lesson? Never leave the mic unattended? Story 28. I work as a wedding photographer, and let me tell you, animals at weddings are almost always a disaster. One couple wanted their dog to be the ring bearer. Cute, right? Except the second they let him loose, he bolted down the aisle, jumped on the bride's dress, and left giant muddy paw prints all over it. Another couple thought it would be romantic to have butterflies released after their vows, except they forgot to open the box before the ceremony. And when they did, half the butterflies were dead. The guests just watched in horrified silence as lifeless butterflies fell to the ground. But the worst was a couple who wanted to have a horse escort the bride in. Everything was fine, until the horse got spooked right before she dismounted. It reared up, the bride screamed, and the poor officiant jumped out of the way just in time before getting trampled. The bride landed right in a pile of mud. If you're thinking of including animals in your wedding, maybe reconsider. Story 29. I'm a caterer, and I wish people would stop doing DIY wedding cakes to save money. It never ends well. One time, a couple had a friend make their wedding cake instead of a professional. When they went to cut it, the whole thing collapsed. Turns out, the friend used store-bought cake mix but stacked it like a professional tier cake. It wasn't sturdy enough to hold its own weight. The couple had to awkwardly serve cupcakes instead. At another wedding, the cake melted because the couple thought it'd be cute to have the cake table outside in the summer heat. By the time they went to cut it, it was a puddle of icing and sadness. And then there was the wedding where the bride's grandma made the cake. It looked questionable but smelled okay. But when they cut into it, it was still raw inside. The couple had to pretend to eat it for photos while the guests quietly opted for cookies instead. Want a nice cake? Pay a professional. Story 30. I work as a wedding officiant, and let's talk about badly timed weather disasters. Everyone loves the idea of a romantic outdoor wedding, until nature decides otherwise. One wedding was held in an open field. No tent, no cover, just vows under the sky. Right in the middle of the ceremony, a freak thunderstorm hit. The guests screamed as rain poured down. The bride's dress was soaked, and the groom's hair gel started running down his face. They had to finish their vows under umbrellas while guests ran for their cars. Another couple insisted on having their wedding on a cliffside. The view was amazing, until insane wind gusts showed up. The bride's veil flew off mid-vows and got stuck in a tree 20 feet away. The officiant had to shout over the wind, and half the guests couldn't hear anything. But the absolute worst? A beach wedding where the tide came in faster than expected. The couple was ankle-deep in water by the time they finished their vows. One of the bridesmaids tried to move the decorations, tripped, and face-planted into the ocean. If you're planning an outdoor wedding, check the weather. Twice. Story 31. I'm a wedding planner, and nothing creates chaos quite like the let's wing it couple. You know the type. No seating chart, no schedule, just vibes. They think being laid back will make their wedding more fun. It never does. One couple refused to assign tables because they wanted people to mingle naturally. Instead, a stampede at the reception as guests scrambled for seats. A grandma ended up sitting at the kids' table, and the maid of honor ate her dinner standing up. Another couple didn't set a time for cake cutting, first dance, or speeches. They just told the DJ, "We'll let you know when we feel like it." The problem? They forgot. By the time they finally cut the cake, half the guests had already left. The absolute worst? A bride who thought rehearsals were unnecessary. Come wedding day, no one knew when to walk. The officiant was 3 drinks in by the time they started, and the flower girl ran away because no one told her what to do. Want a fun wedding? Have a plan. Story 32. I'm a photographer, and I have to talk about the obsession with over-the-top wedding photo shoots. Some couples forget that weddings are about the actual wedding, not just Instagram likes. One bride insisted on having her photos taken in a field of sunflowers. Sounds beautiful, right? Except it was 100 degrees outside, and the field was swarming with bees. Half the bridal party got stung, and the bride was fanning her armpits between every shot. Another couple wanted to take pictures on a dock by the lake. The problem? The dock was old and unstable. The best man stepped a little too hard, and the whole thing tilted. He fell into the water, dragging the groom with him. They had to borrow towels from a nearby boat just to dry off before the reception. The worst one? A couple hired a horse for a fairy tale photo shoot. The bride climbed on in her dress, and the horse took off. She ended up screaming as the photographer ran after her. It took 3 people to calm the horse down. Lesson? Maybe stick to normal locations. Story 33. I'm a wedding DJ, and I have to talk about brides and grooms who think they're stand-up comedians. Some couples decide their wedding is the perfect time to roast their new spouse in front of all their friends and family. One groom's speech started with, "Wow, I never thought I'd be standing here today, because a bride used to be so picky that I thought she'd die alone." The bride laughed awkwardly, but her mom did not. Another bride thought it would be funny to tell a long, detailed story about how bad the groom was at proposing. She reenacted his stuttering, made fun of the ring he chose, and even joked that she almost said no. The best man visibly cringed. The groom looked like he wanted to disappear. But the absolute worst? A couple who planned a fake fight? Midway through the reception, they pretended to get into an argument about where to honeymoon, then stormed out. Some guests were so uncomfortable, they actually left early. The bride and groom thought it was hilarious. No one else did. Want humor at your wedding? Maybe don't humiliate your spouse. Story 34. I'm a florist, and I need to talk about wedding bouquet disasters. Brides think throwing a bouquet is simple, but somehow, something always goes wrong. One time, a bride overestimated her throw and launched the bouquet straight into the chandelier. It got stuck. Guests had to wait while the venue staff tried to fish it out with a broom. Another bride had a super heavy bouquet. Tons of roses, eucalyptus, even succulents. Why? When she threw it, it hit her maid of honor in the face, full-on black eye. The poor girl had to pose for photos with an ice pack on her cheek. But the worst? A bride faked the toss. She turned around, pretended to throw it, then handed it directly to her best friend as a hint for her boyfriend. The entire room went silent. The boyfriend walked out. The couple broke up 2 weeks later. Want to do a bouquet toss? Throw it and move on. Story 35. I'm a bartender, and let me tell you, wedding guests who think they can outdrink everyone are a problem. It's always one guy, usually an uncle, a college friend, or a random +1, who decides they need to get their money's worth from the open bar. One time, a guy challenged the bartender to make the strongest drink possible. He downed it, slammed the glass on the counter, and yelled, "Another." Within an hour, he was face down on a table snoring. Another time, a bridesmaid bet a groomsman that she could outdrink him. She won, but not before vomiting into her own purse. But the worst? A guest who got so drunk that he wandered into the venue's kitchen and started grabbing food off the trays. Security had to escort him out, but not before he tried to steal a bottle of champagne. Open bars are fun, until someone turns into a cautionary tale. Story 36. I'm a wedding planner, and I have to talk about grooms who try to prank their brides. Look, I get that some guys want to add humor to their wedding, but when the prank is at the bride's expense, it's never as funny as they think. One groom thought it would be hilarious to fake forget his vows. He got up there, patted his pockets, and said, "Oh no, I forgot them." The bride looked mortified. He then pulled out a crumpled napkin as a joke. She did not laugh. Another guy planned to swap the wedding ring with a joke ring, a huge plastic one from a toy store. When the officiant asked for the rings, he pulled it out, smirking. The bride looked ready to kill him. The officiant refused to continue until he got the real ring out. But the worst? A groom pretended to drop the wedding ring into a lake. He made a huge show of fumbling it, and the bride screamed. The guests gasped. Turns out he had the real ring in his pocket, but by the time he admitted it, the bride was furious and refused to put it on. Want to have a fun wedding? Maybe don't humiliate your wife on her big day. Story 37. I'm a photographer, and I hate when couples decide to do balloon releases at their wedding. It seems so cute. Everyone lets go of balloons at the same time for a beautiful, emotional moment. But in reality, total disaster. One wedding, the couple had guests release 100 helium balloons during the first dance. Problem? The wind blew half of them straight into a nearby tree. The rest landed in the cake. Guests were picking balloon pieces out of their frosting all night. Another couple had white doves attached to balloons. Don't even get me started on how horrible that was for the birds. When they let go, one of the balloons got stuck in a power line, and the whole venue lost electricity. They had to finish dinner by candlelight. And the worst? A bride accidentally let go of her balloon bouquet before the ceremony even started. One of them had her grandmother's wedding ring tied to it as a sentimental tribute. It floated away, never to be seen again. Lesson? Maybe just take nice photos instead. Story 38. I'm a bartender, and I've seen way too many people turn weddings into their own personal drinking competitions. One guy showed up already drunk. He had a flask in his pocket during the ceremony and was taking swigs while standing next to the groom. By the reception, he was barefoot, shirt half unbuttoned, trying to convince the DJ to play Sweet Caroline for the fourth time. Another time, a guest kept double-fisting drinks and bragging about how he could outdrink anyone. By the end of the night, he was curled up under the gift table, hugging a pile of presents like a pillow. The worst? A groom's cousin decided to do wedding shots with random guests. He made it his mission to get every single table to drink with him. He got so hammered that during the speeches, he grabbed the mic and started slurring about his failed relationships. Security had to drag him out mid-sentence. Open bars are great, but some people should have a drink limit. Story 39. I work as a florist, and I cringe every time a couple decides to do an elaborate entrance with fireworks. It sounds epic, walking into the reception with sparks flying around you. In reality, it's a logistical nightmare. One wedding had indoor sparklers lining the aisle. Problem? The bride's dress had long lace sleeves. As she walked through, one of the sparklers caught the edge of her sleeve, and it started smoking. The guests screamed, and a bridesmaid had to pat her down before it turned into a full-blown fire. Another couple had fireworks set to go off as they were announced as husband and wife. The problem? The fireworks were placed too close to the seating. When they went off, ash rained down on the guests. A woman in the front row got singed hair extensions and had to leave early. And the worst? A couple had huge outdoor fireworks planned for their grand exit. Turns out they forgot to check local regulations. Midway through, cops showed up. They shut the whole thing down, and the couple ended their night with a hefty fine. Fireworks might look cool, but maybe just stick to sparkling. Story 40. I'm an officiant, and let me tell you, some people think writing their own vows means turning it into a comedy routine. I get that some couples want to be funny, but some take it way too far. One groom started his vows with, "I promise to love you even when you steal the blankets, spend all my money, and make me late everywhere." The bride laughed awkwardly. Her dad did not laugh at all. Another bride rapped her vows. Yes, you read that right. She pulled out a microphone, played an instrumental beat, and started rapping about how her husband was the best in the game. The guests just sat there in stunned silence. But the worst? A groom who pretended to have forgotten his vows, only to pull out his phone and start reading them from a text message. The bride rolled her eyes so hard I thought she was going to walk out. Vows should be meaningful, not a bad comedy routine. Story 41. I'm a wedding planner, and I've seen some terrible ideas for wedding favors. Couples spend so much money on little gifts that guests immediately leave behind. The worst part? The couples always think they're so unique when, in reality, I've seen the same useless favors at hundreds of weddings. One couple gave out tiny succulents as favors. Cute idea. Except half the guests forgot them at their tables. By the end of the night, I was throwing away plants like a heartless monster. Another couple thought it'd be fun to give guests personalized shot glasses with their names and wedding date on. One problem? Half the guests were under 21 or didn't drink. By cleanup time, there were rows of abandoned shot glasses lined up on the bar. The worst? A couple who handed out homemade candles. Sounds nice, right? Except they made them themselves, and something went very wrong. When guests lit them at home, they smelled like burnt rubber. They got so many complaints they had to send out an apology email. If you're going to do wedding favors, just give people something edible. Story 42. I'm a photographer, and one of the worst things I've seen is couples forcing their wedding party into ridiculous outfits. Some people just don't care if their friends and family look absolutely insane as long as they get their perfect wedding aesthetic. One bride made her bridesmaids wear full-length velvet gowns for a beach wedding. It was 90 degrees outside, and by the time photos started, they were sweating through their dresses. One of them almost passed out from heat exhaustion. Another couple thought it'd be quirky to have their groomsmen dress like superheroes, and I don't mean hidden socks or cufflinks, I mean full-on capes and masks. The groom even insisted on a photo where he was lifting the bride like Superman. It ended with him dropping her. The worst? A couple who forced their bridal party to wear colored contact lenses to match their enchanted forest theme. One bridesmaid got an eye infection because of it. Moral of the story? If your outfit choices could injure someone, rethink them. Story 43. I'm a wedding DJ, and nothing ruins a party faster than the couple banning certain music genres. One wedding, the bride banned all country music because she hated it. Problem? Half the guests were from Texas. By the time they realized there'd be no country music, people started leaving early. Another couple forbid line dances. No Cupid Shuffle, no Cha-Cha Slide, nothing. I warned them that some guests expect those songs, but they didn't listen. By the middle of the reception, people were begging me to play something fun. I finally caved and put on Cotton Eye Joe. The dance floor immediately filled up, and the bride glared at me for the rest of the night. The worst? A couple banned slow dances. No first dance, no parent dances, nothing. They just wanted high-energy club music. The guests? Confused and exhausted. The bride's mom literally begged me to play one slow song so she could dance with her husband. The couple refused. Weddings aren't just about the couple. Guests need to have fun too. Story 44. I'm a caterer, and nothing makes me cringe harder than couples trying to serve trendy wedding food instead of just feeding people something good. One couple had an all-vegan, gluten-free menu because they wanted their wedding to be eco-conscious. That's great, except none of the guests were vegan. By the end of the night, people were sneaking out to McDonald's. Another couple insisted on having a sushi-only reception. The problem? They had zero backup food. Half the guests didn't eat raw fish, and we had no alternatives. The groom's grandma ended up eating crackers from the bar for dinner. The worst? A bride who banned forks because she wanted the meal to be interactive. She made us serve only finger foods. People were trying to eat pasta with their hands. A guest literally picked up a meatball and looked at me like, "What am I supposed to do with this?" Trendy food is fun, but people just want a solid meal. Story 45. I'm a wedding officiant, and one of the worst things I've seen is couples turning their ceremony into a stand-up routine. One groom rapped his vows. He even hired a hype man. His best man chimed in with ad-libs after every line. I promise to love you forever. Yeah, he do. The bride looked miserable. Another couple made their entire ceremony a parody of The Office. They had their officiant pretend to be Michael Scott, and the vows included word-for-word dialogue from the show. I love The Office, but watching an emotional moment get interrupted by someone saying, "That's what she said," was painful. The worst? A groom who thought it'd be hilarious to fake getting cold feet. The officiant asked if he'd take his bride as his wife, and he paused for a solid 30 seconds. The bride's face dropped. He finally laughed and said, "Just kidding," but the mood was dead. It's a wedding, not an improv show. Read the room. Story 46. I'm a wedding planner, and I have to talk about couples who try to DIY their entire wedding. Pinterest and TikTok have convinced people that planning a wedding themselves will be easy and affordable. Spoiler alert. It never is. One bride decided to make all her floral arrangements herself. Bouquets, centerpieces, even the altar decorations. The problem? She had no experience with flowers. By the time the wedding rolled around, the bouquets were wilting, the centerpieces were falling apart, and the altar? It collapsed in the wind. Another couple decided they would cook their own wedding dinner. They rented a commercial kitchen and had their family help. The result? The food was hours late. The groom's dad burned his hand on a deep fryer, and guests were eating cold spaghetti by the time it was served. The worst? A bride made her own wedding cake because she wanted to save money. She miscalculated the ingredients, and by the time she went to cut it, it caved in on itself. They ended up serving store-bought cupcakes at the last minute. DIY is fine for small things, but if it's crucial, hire a professional. Story 47. I'm a wedding photographer, and let's talk about disaster proposals that happen at weddings. For some reason, guests love to steal the couple's thunder by proposing at someone else's wedding. It never goes well. One guy thought it'd be romantic to propose during the bouquet toss. Right when the bride turned around, he dropped to one knee in front of his girlfriend. The crowd was confused. The bride looked furious, and the girlfriend said number. Another guy proposed right after the cake cutting. He made a big speech about how love was in the air, pulled out a ring, and completely hijacked the moment. The couple had to awkwardly stand there while guests cheered for someone else's engagement. The bride later admitted she stopped talking to them after the wedding. The worst? A maid of honor got proposed to during the first dance. Her boyfriend walked onto the dance floor, interrupted the couple's moment, and got down on one knee. The DJ literally cut the music out of shock. The bride left her own dance and walked off. If you're thinking of proposing at a wedding, don't. Story 48. I'm a wedding DJ, and the absolute worst thing a couple can do is force their guests to do a choreographed dance. Look, some people love dancing, but most just want to drink and vibe. One wedding, the couple insisted that everyone participate in a 15-minute dance routine they taught the night before. Half the guests were miserable. The groom's dad just stood there, refusing to move. The worst? A bride who forced her grandma to get up and do the Macarena. The poor woman didn't know the moves and just stood there looking confused while the bride yelled, "Come on, Nana! Dancing should be fun, not mandatory audience participation." Story 49. I'm a bartender, and let me tell you about grooms who try to turn their wedding into a frat party. Weddings should be a little classy, but some grooms think it's their last night of freedom and act like they're at a college kegger. One wedding, the groom brought a beer bong to the reception. He made his groomsmen chug beer at the head table mid-dinner. His bride looked mortified. Another guy convinced the DJ to play a drinking game with the guests. Every time he yelled, "Take a shot," the bartenders were supposed to line up tequila shots for the tables. By the end of the night, half the guests were too drunk to stand. The worst? A groom who ripped his shirt off halfway through the reception, climbed onto the bar, and started pouring drinks into people's mouths. Security had to escort him out of his own wedding. If your wedding looks like a spring break special, maybe rethink your choices.